Hello, everybody. A really interesting episode for you this week. I have two listener questions. The first one is from somebody who has developed panic disorder. So they're having recurrent panic attacks, and it's really getting in the way of their life to the point that they're not able to, do their normal stuff the way they would like, and they're feeling very physically uncomfortable. So I get into the weeds about how to deal with that, as well as some resources and ideas there. And then the second question is a bit different. It's from somebody who is a caregiver for a loved one with a traumatic brain injury, and they're looking for more help with resources for caregivers and how they can take care of themselves while also taking care of their loved one. So buckle up and let's get into it. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist and a self-help author from Southern California. My goal is to make mental health content for real people, just like you. And in this show, I answer your questions or dive deep into topics related to life, psychology, mental health, relationships, and more. Please be aware that sometimes I use some spicy language, and I also don't shy away from sensitive topics, but I will try to give you a content warning whenever it's relevant. So if all this sounds good to you, let's get started. All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. Thank you very much for joining me. This is episode 391. I appreciate you for being here. Nothing too much to get into before jumping into the episode proper. I am giving it a shot to stream this on Twitch. So if any of you guys are Twitch fans, I may or may not continue doing this. I've been thinking that it'd be fun to start a Twitch channel where I could do, live streams as I'm recording, along with sort of work with me videos when I'm doing writing, some of the stuff that I've done when I've streamed on Instagram or Facebook before. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. I really enjoy watching that sort of thing. And it's kind of a good motivator for me to get work done if I'm doing it along with people, sort of like co-working. So I don't know. It's just a thought. If you want to check out my Twitch, I haven't done anything to it yet, but it's just Duff the Psych. So Duff the Psych on Twitch. But yeah, I got two really good questions here. Let's just go ahead and jump into the first one. It reads, "Hello. First and foremost, I want to thank you for answering these questions and producing the podcast. It has become a tool I use to help process my anxiety and make sense of my feelings both at work and outside of the house. I am a 24-year-old graduate student who works as a graduate assistant and intern at my future workplace. Over the past few months, I have developed a pretty nasty panic disorder. I used to be a very social person and enjoyed going places, but now I struggle to go to the grocery store or stay at work. I've tried everything I can think of, from therapy to medication, and nothing has made any significant progress. My panic attacks have become so physical that my vision shakes due to my facial twitching, and it's hard to move my body due to strong tingling sensation and muscle rigidity. I've visited the doctor many times, and they've concluded that I'm experiencing severe panic attacks to the point where my body is constantly tense, sore, and in a panic state. I can't seem to get out of this hole no matter how hard I try. I'm still trying different medications and continuing therapy. I'm beginning to feel overwhelmed and defeated because I don't know how long and how bad this will get. I don't know what to do next." So, hey there, thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry that you're struggling so much with this. I hope that I can provide some ideas for you and maybe some hope for your situation. I personally have a lot of experience in working with people with anxiety disorders and panic disorder in particular. So first, let me explain a couple terms here. Some of these things you, the person asking, probably already knows, but for the audience in general, let me define a few things. Because a lot of people have heard of panic disorder before, but some people might not fully understand what it actually is. So first off, let's start with what is a panic attack. A panic attack is not simply just a moment of high stress. It's usually pretty short. It tends to build and peak around 10 minutes for most people. It can be longer for some. It can be shorter, certainly. But it's basically a short period of intense fear and discomfort that can include things like heart palpitations, pounding heartbeat, sweating, shortness of breath, feelings of choking, like it's hard to breathe, dizziness, dissociation, like depersonalization or derealization, where you feel disconnected from yourself or from reality, fear of dying, numbness and tingling, hot flashes, and fear of losing control or going crazy. So, as you can hear from all the different potential symptoms, panic attacks can look a lot of different ways, but no matter what, they are very uncomfortable. They're not dangerous. I'll talk more about that, but they are extremely uncomfortable, and it sucks. It feels like you might die, or feels like you might lose it. So that's a panic attack. And panic disorder, this is when you have one or more panic attacks, and then you develop basically a persistent fear of having more panic attacks in the future, or a really strong fear of the consequences of potential attacks. Like if you were to have a panic attack, what might happen because of that? For instance, you might drive off the road, or you might not be able to care for your child, or have a heart attack, etc. Now, notably in the criteria, right, in the DSM criteria, the book that we use to diagnose, it needs to be a month or more to be considered panic disorder, meaning you have a panic attack or a series of panic attacks, and then that's followed by at least a month of this really persistent fear. One way to think of it is it's almost like a phobia of panic attacks. And interestingly, it sucks, but it can be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where your fear and anticipation of potentially having panic is what actually causes you to start having panic symptoms, right? You're like, okay, oh my gosh, I really don't want to, but I feel like I might start to panic. I'm really worried about that. And then your body says, oh, hey, I recognize that sensation. Heart rate speeding up, thoughts are spiraling. I think we're having a panic attack. And then it just kicks into gear and goes for it. So it can make itself happen, and it gets to be a really vicious cycle. And so in order to, not have that vicious cycle, a lot of people will start to avoid. It'll lead to patterns of avoidance. It'll lead to self-medication through things like alcohol or weed or other substances, of course. Sometimes other problematic behaviors related to the attacks, just ways to sort of try to get around the sensations that you're having when you have a panic attack. And because of the avoidance piece, panic disorder is very closely tied to something called agoraphobia. It actually used to be that in the older forms of the DSM, it was kind of paired together. So you could have like panic disorder with agoraphobia or panic disorder without it. They're separated out now, but they are still very, closely tied together. But agoraphobia is the fear and anxiety about being in situations where you're really kind of exposed. So things like, say, public transport, or being in a big crowd, say at a football game or something, being outside alone, being in enclosed spaces like a shop or a movie theater. And essentially, the way this interacts with panic disorder is that you have this anticipatory anxiety, right? You have this fear about what might happen, and it's an anticipation about being somewhere where if you had a panic attack, you wouldn't be able to escape, right? You're like, oh my God, I can't have a panic attack at the mall. What am I going to do, right? What do I do if I'm in the middle of a store standing in line to buy something and I start panicking? And so because you have that fear, you start to avoid things. You start to stay within your safe zones. Maybe this is like at home. Maybe this is with a specific person and you can't go out without them. School, whatever the case may be, you have kind of these safe places that you tend to stick to more and more often. And on the extreme side, agoraphobia can mean you really basically don't leave your house, even to do something small like check the mail or something like that. So for you, it sounds like all of this that I've described, right? The panic disorder, starting with the panic attack, leading to that fear, some of the agoraphobia, this is all pretty in line with what you described. Not necessarily full-blown agoraphobia in your case, but it's starting to creep in there with the difficulty of, being in stores, as you said, or the difficulty staying at work. So, one thing to keep in mind is when we classify something as a disorder, right, a mental health disorder, that means that it's really getting in the way of your life. It's causing, severe distress, or it's getting in the way of school or work or relationships. And in this case, it sounds like it's really getting in the way of your life. So I'm glad that you reached out. I already shot you an email. You already heard from me today, and I gave you access to my online course. But if anybody out there is in a similar situation and all this stuff sounds familiar to you, please know that my online course, even though it's 5 years old now, is still a really, really good comprehensive resource to work on panic and to approach exposure work in the right way. When I say the right way, I mean there's a lot of therapists out there for, no fault of their own necessarily, or not intentionally at least. They just suck at doing exposure work. Maybe they were never taught, kind of the real way to go about doing it and the structure that it often takes. And yeah, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but in this course, I go through it step by step. I break everything down for you. If you haven't already checked it out, the online course is at kickanxietycourse.com. The course is called Kick Anxiety's Ass. It's a sort of 10-week course that goes through everything. So hopefully it's helpful to you, the question asker. And if anybody else is interested or has questions, just let me know. But yeah, looking at your situation, one thing I'm interested in is sort of the recency of all of this, meaning this is just the past few months, you said, that this is kind of developed. So I'd be curious about whether something happened that kind of kicked this off. Was there an activating event? Something that preceded that first panic attack, which now has started this frustrating pattern that you find yourself in. And it could be anything. It could be something that's just like a scary situation, something that may be on the other side a little bit more extreme and traumatic. Could be a health-related issue, or maybe you got some really bad news on the phone and that sent you for a spiral. Anything. And it doesn't have to be the case that there's a very, very specific trigger for all of this. But if you did find one, if you're able to zero in on something where, it's a clear indicator that this is the start point of this panic disorder, then you could have a really good target to sort of direct your efforts more specifically. For example, let's say that you had a situation where you were, at work or, walking to school or something, and you started having some pretty nasty heart palpitations. It happens. Maybe you had too much caffeine on that day. Maybe you were underslept. Maybe you were a little sick, whatever. But you had these palpitations and it really freaked you out. And so that started kind of the anxiety and panic spiral. And once you start worrying about it, then it gets worse and you're so focused on it that you were sure, you're going to have a heart attack. So maybe you sat down, maybe you even called like 911 or the nurse's hotline or something like that. And it was a really scary experience for you. That would be one example of, an activating event to kick off that panic disorder pattern. Then if that were the case, this hypothetical situation, one of your tasks would probably be doing some what we call interoceptive exposure, meaning exposure to the internal symptoms that sort of cue your brain that it's panicking or anxious. So for you, you would want to focus in on things like the sensation of your heart racing. And you can do things like do jumping jacks or run on a treadmill or hyperventilate intentionally to sort of show yourself that you can actually tolerate those uncomfortable sensations and become less reactive to those bodily changes when they come up in everyday life, right? So if you're practicing and noticing that, hey, my heart rate can go all over the place, my blood pressure can rise, my breathing can be erratic, but I always come back down to baseline given time, then you prove to your body that these sensations don't mean danger. They don't mean that you're going to die or something. So, when you walk into your lab at school and you feel that sort of rise in the heart rate and stuff like that, you don't have to be as alarmed by it. You don't have to be as thrown off by it. You can say, okay, this doesn't feel good, but it's familiar. And that might help you deal with it a bit more. Again, I talk through all of this in my online course, but a big part of exposure work is trying to simulate the sensations that usually start that anxiety cascade for your panic attacks and working to sort of defuse them and demystify them. Anxiety is not going to hurt you. You're not going to drop dead from a panic attack. I do want to talk more about kind of some specifics and things to look into here, but before that, let's take a quick break and hear from our first sponsor. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. I have been spending a lot of time thinking about, time recently. A lot of us find ourselves wishing that we had more time. And the question is, for what? Why do we want more time? For me, I've come to the realization that time is certainly finite, but we can always find ways to use our time better and in ways that are more consistent with our actual desires. So finding out what matters to you and prioritizing it can make all of the difference until you're able to find that time machine that you're looking for. So for me, this has been about making intentional time to spend with my kids, with my family, with my loved ones. For you, it may be something else. And one of the best ways to learn about what really matters to you and develop a plan to prioritize it is through therapy. So for a quick and easy way to get started with therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. The best part is it's entirely online. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/duff today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/duff. So I said that anxiety is not going to hurt you, but you do want to make sure that you're looking in thoroughly to the medical side of things. You said that you've been going to the doctor, but I wonder what kind of doctor and how seriously you're being taken. It could be that there's nothing more than just psychiatric symptoms here, and it's, very uncomfortable, but there's nothing real physical at the source. But there are also other possibilities for the symptoms that you're describing. So, for example, going to, say, an endocrinologist, so a doctor that focuses on hormones, can help you to rule out issues caused by hormones, like, for instance, your thyroid. Hyperthyroidism, when you have too much thyroid hormone, it can cause things like tremors, rapid heartbeat, and a sense of just nervousness and unease. You said that you're on medications. There are side effects potentially from medications. There's also a disorder called serotonin syndrome, when you're on multiple medications that kind of both or all work on the neurotransmitter serotonin. This can also happen if you're taking, say, over-the-counter stuff, like, for instance, if you're taking an SSRI, like Prozac, for instance, and you're also using St. John's wort, which is a medicinal herb that has a similar effect. It double dips too much and you can get serotonin syndrome. And that serotonin syndrome can cause things like agitation, abnormal eye movements, fast heart rate, increased body temperature, loss of motor coordination, and also muscle rigidity. And hearing kind of what you talked about, I'm not saying that this is happening to you, but these are all things that I would want to rule out. It's important not to leave any stones unturned just in case there's, a real physical medical issue at the root of what you're experiencing and potentially could be treated. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself if you're not given the type of care that you deserve or you don't feel like you're being taken seriously. Similarly, if you're working with your primary care doctor for the medication management for these psychiatric medications, you may want to think about seeing a specialist, which in this case would be a psychiatrist. And they're more focused on these kinds of issues, managing mental health issues with medication and other approaches like that. Not all medications are created equal. There are many different types, right? So you might take, say, an SSRI, like I mentioned, every day to lower your overall reactivity and how much anxiety you're experiencing. But you might also look into things like maybe a benzodiazepine, something like Xanax, where, when you're feeling that panic come on, you can take a little bit of it and bring things back down a bit. Now, of course, that's something you need to work on with your doctor. It's not always safe to be using that if you're going to be driving and stuff like that, but there are many options here. And you might just need more of a nuanced approach. Also, therapists, not all created equal. Some of us are great. Some of us suck. Some of us are great at some things and suck at others, right? There are certain issues that I'm not very good at working with. This would be one that I would be good at working with in therapy. And there's other people that have a different experience. So I would ask, does the person that you're working with, the therapist you're working with, do they specialize in anxiety disorders? If in therapy, you're basically just talking about your experience, you're having a chat, you're getting empathy and support from them, that's great, but that's not really sufficient for what you're dealing with. You should be working on things like techniques for grounding when you're feeling out of your, disconnected and out of reality. You should be working on, deep diaphragmatic breathing exercises to take down the nervous system a few notches and bring you back to something of a baseline. You should be developing a plan of attack to defuse your anxiety and work toward gradual exposure step by step. So, if these things aren't happening, maybe that's an indicator that the person you're working with just doesn't really specialize in these type of issues. Again, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And there are other approaches, right? The thing that I'm describing isn't the only way to work on panic, but it is one of the gold standard approaches. It is one of the things that's supported in clinical research. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, even if that means finding a better match for a therapist, for a doctor, for whoever. You're trying really hard here, and I can tell you're really working at this, and I appreciate that. You're trying not to give up. I'm not a psychic, so I can't say exactly how this is going to play out for you, but there's a really good chance that this is not just going to be how you are forever. You're going through a tough period, and sometimes things just take time to ease up. So while you're struggling with the panic and the other symptoms, please go easy on yourself. You're not doing anything wrong. This isn't just how you are now. This is how you are right now in this moment. It's a snapshot. So continuing to approach these things that are difficult is important and will ultimately, along with time, be the biggest contributor to your success and improvement. But make sure you're also looking at the other possibilities that I mentioned, medically, etc. And hopefully you get a lot out of the resources like the online course. But don't forget to live life a little too while you're recovering from this. It can be very, very tempting. And sometimes, it seems like unavoidable to put all of your attention and all of your effort into this specific issue because it's right in your face. It's causing you problems. But you're also allowed to enjoy life in the ways that you can right now. So don't be afraid to live a little too. So thank you for the question. You got this. All right, so on to the second question. It reads, "Hello, Dr. Duff. Love the podcast and your books have been very helpful also. Do you have any insight on online resources or advice for caregivers of people with dementia, in this case related to a TBI, which is traumatic brain injury? I'm really struggling to take care of myself when my loved one needs extra care during waking hours. I try to stay up late or wake up early to get an hour of extra me time, but often that translates to catching up on housework or other necessary chores, not really taking care of myself. I feel if there was an online support group or something scheduled, I would be more likely to carve out time rather than just saying, I'll do self-care time when I have a moment. Any insight you have would be awesome. Thank you." Yeah, so this is a really good question, and one that I am often in a position where I'm counseling people on this. So thank you for writing it in. It's always fun for me when I get to blend my day job with my other work. And if there's anybody who's not aware, my day job is working as a neuropsychologist. So what I do is I actually test people for issues like dementia or to investigate the impact of a brain injury or a stroke or something like that. So you mentioned that you are providing care for a loved one with a traumatic brain injury. First thing to point out to everyone listening is that this can mean many different things depending on the location of the brain injury, how severe and bad the injury was, and how recent the event was that caused the injury. On the less severe end of the spectrum, you have things like concussions, which are often referred to as mild traumatic brain injuries or MTBIs. And from this, you might have some immediate after effects like dizziness, nausea, sensitivity to light, maybe irritability, brain fog, headache, things of that sort. But most often, these effects subside relatively quickly for a concussion, at least if it's a single concussion. Repeated concussions is a whole different story. On the other hand, if you have a TBI from a car accident, which results in something really bad like a intracranial hemorrhage, like a brain bleed, you can have some serious changes to functioning and personality, if not a full coma. Generally speaking, most people tend to recover the most. They have the bulk of their recovery from TBIs within the first year. There can certainly be continued progress from there, but it slows down as you get further out from the initial injury. I already talked about this a little bit on the last episode, but you can see everything from memory issues to behavior, personality change, depending on where in the brain somebody was injured. And in some cases, this means that the person is now fully dependent on others for things like basics, bathing, toileting, right? Maybe you have to change adult diapers, dressing, medical care, medication administration. For others, maybe they're just very agitated or even physically violent with you when you try to get them to do things like take their medications or say, hey, let's go out for a walk or let's try to do something together. They might become agitated and take a swing at you or throw things, etc. All this is to say, it can be really fucking tough being a caregiver for somebody with a traumatic brain injury. You asked for resources, though, so I'll start there. There are some great online resources as well as books that you can get. So first off, caregiver.org, pretty simple one to remember. Caregiver.org has some very good resources for people in your position, including support groups, services by state, so you can look at local things, events and classes, and also a variety of different resources for you to take care of yourself as well as your loved one. There are also some very good books. I would suggest Caregiver's Bible by William Madison. In some cases, the Self-Compassion, it's a book called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff, is also a really good one because caregivers do tend to be pretty hard on themselves about all of this. And for your situation, there's a book called Dementia with Grace by Vicki Nolan Finch. That's also good. I'll try to put all of these into the show notes, just dissect.com/episode 391. But those are all great resources. They're a good starting place. They have kind of slightly different approaches to this stuff. But all of that would be good. I think if you just sort of spend one night with Google, you go there and you try to find some stuff, you're going to find a great number of online resources, including like social media profiles. There's a really good Instagram one. It's at dementia_careblazers, right? Careblazers, C-A-R-E. So dementia_careblazers. And she is, I think, a psychologist as well. But she has a family member with, I believe, Alzheimer's, some form of dementia. And she posts, not only personal things, but stuff that's related to caring for yourself as a caregiver, tips for dealing with behaviors and things like that. And I'm sure there are so many more, right? TikToks, YouTube channels, blogs. There's a lot of online support groups as well. So all of those are out there. Just need to spend a little bit of time looking through some of the resources online and getting a feel for it. And aside from this, I would highly encourage you to seek out in-person resources in your area. Since I don't know exactly where you are geographically, I can't give you specific recommendations, but there is a chance that you have somewhere that you could go in person to find these sort of helpful resources. Near my office that I work out of in Camarillo, California, as a neuropsychologist, we have 2 organizations that are, very conveniently close by. But I often refer people to them. Actually, I did today in actual feedback that I gave. One of them is called the Caregiver Wellness Center, and the other one is called the Brain Injury Center. And this would be right up the alley with what you're looking for here. Now, for you, you might just want to go to Google and type in, caregiver resources and your city, right? So caregiver resources Los Angeles or caregiver resources Atlanta. Or you can do your county or a zip code, right? And this should be able to help you figure out if there's anything around there. These organizations are great because they'll often have classes, support groups, and events that you can attend. And they'll also be familiar with the other resources in your area. So say you're looking for like an adult daycare for your loved one, where they're going to go each day to have activities and get some extra care. Or you need respite care, like you're going to be going out for a vacation or a surgery or something, and you need somebody else to come in and fill your role. They're going to have those resources and potentially give you the referrals that you need to find those sorts of services. Now, even if you're kind of taking in a lot of resources and doing your best to care for yourself, there's just something so healing and validating about being among other people that really get it. So just having a place to air your frustrations, to hear stories that help you know that you're not alone in this can make all the difference. And that's where those support groups come in. That can be in person or online. Now, I want to return to the experience that you described in your question. You mentioned you're not really finding a good way to prioritize your own self-care. And you said that you stay up late to have some you time, but that mostly just turns into taking care of chores and things like that. This is such a common experience. Anybody who is a caregiver for somebody with dementia or, similar situation, they're probably nodding their heads about how familiar this sounds. And honestly, it's not even just for people that are caregivers for disabled adults, right? I hear similar issues amongst, for instance, single parents who have to work and put most of their extra time toward caring for the kids. And then that free time that's left or, carved out isn't really free because it's just when you have time to do all the other stuff that you didn't have time to do while you were doing the stuff that drains you. So it can be a very difficult thing. A resource that I haven't talked about yet in this question is individual therapy. I often suggest this to caregivers because, you might have a tendency to be so wrapped up in caring for your loved one that you lose sight of yourself. And you're trying not to do that here, but it can be really helpful to have a professional that's just devoted to you. And they can point out areas that you're being maybe unreasonable or unfair to yourself, or aspects of your experience that you are neglecting. As well, you may consider the fact that it might not be your place to be the primary caregiver for this loved one forever. I don't want to pretend like the world is all sunshine and rainbows, right? Caregiving costs money, and that money isn't always covered by insurance. It can be complicated. But unless you are a trained caregiver, you probably aren't qualified to be doing what you're doing. And of course, if this is a progressive condition, if they're seeming to get worse over time, it's going to get harder, and there's going to be things that you're maybe not prepared for. You're willing and you want to because you love this person, but it's just simply not your area of expertise, right? I could care about somebody more than anything in the world, but I shouldn't be doing their taxes, right? That's not my area of expertise. Even if they don't have anybody else to do it, right? It shouldn't be me. And I'm sure you're doing a great job, but it's just important to recognize that, like, if this isn't what you do, then, you're a little bit out of your depth and you're doing the best that you can, but it might catch up with you. Even if you are trained to do this, right? Even if you are a professional caregiver, it's different when it's somebody that you're close to. I say this often to family members of people with dementia or traumatic brain injuries, but it's super hard to play both roles, to be a family member or a spouse, and then also having to be the boss or the nag or sort of the nurse. And to do both of those can be really hard, and they can interfere with each other. Being that boss, being that nag can make it so you don't feel like you get to really just enjoy your loved one as a family member. So consider whether you could use some professional help in this situation to allow you to focus more on your loved one simply as a loved one, rather than splitting your role in this way. This is obvious advice, and you already know it, but please remember that you can't be the caregiver this person needs if you burn out. If you lose sight of yourself, if you just completely go kaput, you're not going to be able to give them very good care. And you're obviously right now, and have been, putting your personal needs on the back burner. Maybe this isn't even due to the belief that you should put your loved one first, that they deserve to be ahead of you. It might just be the practical logistics of the situation. They need care. You're there, you have to provide that care. It is what it is. But that might not be sustainable. And if you need to bring in extra help or consider another situation like a placement in an assisted living facility, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Culturally, this can be a bit complicated, right? There are definitely some cultures, and I mean that broadly and kind of more on the micro scale, that are just more inclined to have a negative perspective on things like placing somebody in a facility. They think that somebody should be cared for by their family. And this is totally valid. But if this does apply to you, I would consider you to challenge yourself and think about whether the actual situation you're in matches this cultural ideal. And what I mean by this is, this might be based on the concept that you have a large network of friends and family that are there to assist. And if that's not the reality and you're on your own with this, then that cultural perspective isn't really relevant to your situation. It's maybe something that you hold in the background and it's an aspirational thing, but you have to look at the reality of it, right? So overall, it definitely sounds like you need some support, you need some perspective, and I really appreciate you reaching out. Look into some of these resources, the online ones, the in-person resources. Like I said, I'll put links in the show notes, and just try to be as honest with yourself as possible. You're doing a good job, but you got to take care of you too. So thank you for listening, everybody. That is the end of the episode. You take really good care of yourselves, and I will see you for the next one. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. If you would like to send a question or a topic for a future episode, please email me at duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you like my approach and would like to learn more about my books, online course, or other resources, please head over to my website at duffthepsych.com. And lastly, it would mean so much to me if you would leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to it, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, you got this.